Well, I'll start with the boring stuff, a little bit of my bio. But first and foremost, thank you guys for being here. This is awesome. It's a special place, and this is obviously a special group of people, and we are excited to share with you today. So, my name is Jim Davis. Short version of my bio, and I'll try to move through this. Phones away if you don't mind, unless you want to hit a QR code, and I highly recommend it. We got all sorts of resources. I'll say also at the front end that if anything comes up today, we got about 90 minutes together, and that's about right for an intro session. If anything stems from it, or you got future questions or whatever, please do reach out. I'll share all my contact info. I work for, among other things, a nonprofit organization called the Good Athlete Project. And the goal of that organization is to maximize the potential of athletics as education. It seems simple enough, but obviously can be pretty complicated to do. Just so you know a little bit about my background, what I bring to this. I played football for a long time. I did wrestle for a little while. I was not on your level, but I have great respect for all that you guys do. Again, my history as an athlete comes mostly on the football field and in the weight room. But I've had the very great pleasure of working with athletes from all over, lots of wrestlers along the way. That's me playing over in Europe for a little while. I also paint pictures, I do art, and that's actually right around the founding of the Good Athlete Project. So alongside my athletic career, I studied a lot. So I went to undergrad at Knox College, got my first master's degree from Northwestern University outside Chicago, and then spent some time at Harvard, where I studied human development and psychology. And it was there that like all the light bulbs started going off. So this thing that I had been part of, sports, I played lots of football, coached sports, is going to age me, coached for more than 2 decades, and then all of a sudden had a body of research behind all this cool stuff that I've been a part of to kind of prove it out. So we started the Good Athlete Project and then traveled the world trying to share really important resources and understanding at the intersection of mental health and high performance. So my suggestion today is whether you want to be healthy and learn the life lessons that sports can teach and take them on into the rest of your life, or if you just want to be a badass wrestler, like either way, we've got some really important info for you today. I'll scoot through this next part. I bulked up to about 275, played a little arena football, came back down to a natural weight, played overseas, fullback mostly, coached for a long time. And I think I have to add this. It's going to sound less than humble, and I apologize for that. But I've had the really good fortune of having worked with more than 50 state and national championship teams. So I'll tell you that this stuff works. What we're about to show you today, it works. It's backed by research. It's been put into practice, and we're excited to share it with you. Okay, so who's heard this before? Sports teach life lessons. Yeah, probably everybody, at least some point along the way. And our suggestion is that that's actually a myth. Okay, sports provide the most powerful educational environment on the planet. But it's not the sport necessarily that teaches a life lesson. You can imagine a kid playing basketball in his driveway. He's playing basketball, but it's not the basketball. I can say from first-hand experience, it's not football that changed my life. Football gave me access to coaches and cultures and challenges and growth opportunities, but that's the stuff that really changed me. So this is the platform. Coaches, especially the good ones in this room, know that if you want something to last for a lifetime, that's down to the coach and the culture. But it doesn't happen on accident. It's got to be intentional. And that's going to be an operative word for today, intentional. So we're trying to be really intentional about the way we see things, about the way we engage with challenges, and ultimately about the way we train and perform. All right, so yeah, and there's, you don't need much proof on this. I think you can recognize if sports gone wrong as a daily headline. So if sports actually did teach life lessons, this wouldn't happen to the degree and the intensity that it usually does. So sometimes, and I know a lot of the coaches in the room, Mike included, have had to work and help people out of challenging situations. So we're going to try to get ahead of them as much as we can. All right, feel free to write this down. So we'll go, I've got this workbook for you. It's kind of a guide. Take notes, write down whatever you think might stand out, or like I said, you want extra info on. But does your behavior match your goal? This is a really important idea, and it may seem obvious, but think about that. We call it the mantra of practical mindfulness. So, does your behavior, and you guys are probably really good at owning your behaviors, you're disciplined, driven people, match your goal? And the question, one of the things we're going to reflect on today is what does that look like now, 6 months from now, and maybe if we want to think big for a lifetime. So does your behavior match your goal? Hopefully the answer more often than not will be yes, but that's where the intentionality comes in. All right, page 3 of the workbook. It sounds super simple, but we're going to start with this personal value mantra, and I hope if this ever gets soft, I hope you know that we're going to a pretty gritty and high-performing place. But in that personal value mantra box, what I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is recognize the idea and really believe it, that you matter, okay? And you matter, you're valuable on this planet, and that's that. And you don't have to do anything to prove it. You don't have to prove to anyone that you are valuable, you just are. And I wondered coming into this if there'd be some hesitation. I promise you this is going somewhere important, but I would suggest that if you leave here with nothing else, that's the most important thing. You never wrestle another match. You are still a valuable person on this planet, and where you go could be anywhere. So we're going to look at the prompt. This. So what I'd like you to do for the next 30 seconds, do you feel good being a DJ again today?
Yes.
Yes, man. What I'd like you to write down and try to believe it. I matter, I am inherently valuable, and I don't need to do anything to prove it. If you want to extend on that, please feel free. But we'll start right there. All right, so we're going to move on to setting a vision now. So pinnacle vision. Start by writing down a goal. And it can be any goal. You've probably thought about this. You've probably done plenty of goal setting workshops along the way, but just write down one goal. Write down one of the many goals you might have for yourself. 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it might be. What's one of those goals? And then what I want you to do with this inspiring music in the background is identify what does it look like. So when that goal comes to fruition, when that moment, that pinnacle moment happens, what does it look like? What does it feel like? I've been around athletes long enough to know that this is a component. What does it smell like? Who's there? You know, is your family cheering in the stands? What are you doing? What are they doing? Is your hand raised? The task is to really go there, to really kind of identify, picture, and feel that moment. Really get to it. And the idea is we want to take it out of a resume bullet point and really experience it. And if you're not much of a writer, you can put down bullet points, have people draw pictures before, get to that place. But is anyone willing to share at least the goal part? You don't have to give all the details. Yes, sir.
I'm Paul.
Hi, Paul.
From CVU. And I said that I want to be the best that I can possibly be. Whether it's being at the top of the podium or maybe falling short, I just want to be able to look back on my career and be content and have no regrets.
I like that. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Anybody else? What do you got? You're smiling. Come on. Stand up and tell us who you are.
I'm Tim. I was going to CMU. I had like a short-term goal. It was I want to make the starting lineup this season.
I love that. I think it's a great goal. So you guys are teammates back home too? All right, well, I won't put you on the spot yet, but are wrestlers afraid of public speaking?
It seems like
It seems that's all right. That's okay. I get that sort of humble, do the work. That's totally fair. But in this room, you can brag about yourself. How's that? Okay, so you get the idea though. And the suggestion is you look at that page. The reason those two things are separate is even if that second box doesn't come to life, I'll tell you right now, I'm confident that it can and will. But even if it doesn't, the first one's true, and that's a fact, okay? And one of the reasons that we're doing a little bit of this front-end work is because one of the best high-performing strategies you can hang on to and take forward is remembering that first one all the way through. I'm telling you, when self-doubt starts to creep in, or if you feel like if something doesn't go quite your way on the mat, if you start to doubt you, instead of just being able to reflect on the skills and the processes that got you there, that can be confusing, performance debilitator without question. So hold that, okay? hold that top one for sure. The steadier you are in that place, the more likely that second box will be to happen, if that makes sense. You get that idea? Okay, just an absolute fact. All right, more work. And we'll talk, we'll do some more interactive stuff, and I don't mean to give you too much homework, but I'll also say that if you guys want to double back on this along the dorm or even when you head back home, please do, dig into it, spend some time with it. All right, so this is our core work. This is you, right in the middle. Okay, that's that thing that's inherently valuable, you don't have to do anything to prove. What I'd like you to do is in these big open circles, we're going to think about our core values. Okay, so what do you value most? Okay, and this is kind of an interesting thing. When I was your age, I wish I would have done more of this reflection. It can be a real guide. So it could be family, health, wrestling. Birdie is, that's Kim's dog. She did this exercise and made the list. Our dog. Love and support, whatever it is. Just be honest about it. No one's got to see this. If it's video games, so be it. But what do you actually value most? When you're done with that, these light green circles, or near them, start to think about your most common behaviors. Stuff that you do most often. And those green circles, let's try to identify the ones that align with these values. So for example, if it's family, maybe it's as simple as hanging out with family, or call mom, or weekly barbecue, whatever it might be. If it's health, maybe it's 8 hours of sleep, you're aiming for that. If it's wrestling, it's approaching training, or training once, twice, 3 times a day, whatever it is. But talk about your most common behaviors that are aligned with those values. And I'll just put the whole piece together. If something pops into your mind that doesn't seem all that aligned, throw it out to one of these orange circles. Common behaviors that are misaligned. I bet everyone can identify with some of this. Doom scrolling, is that a term that people are familiar with? You've been there. How about rehearsing arguments? Anyone ever been in that place? You're having complicated, negative conversations with people, but just in your head, and you haven't even had to talk with them yet? A lot of people have spent a lot of time in that place. There's some good writing going on again. I don't want to rush you guys, but just so we can get into the conversations. I want you to remember a couple things. Number one is that there should never be any judgment about this. This is just assessment. None of this is good or bad. What we're trying to get to ultimately is it aligned or misaligned? And that's it. We're going to talk a lot today about energy management, okay, and how to perform at a high level when you're called upon to do so. And one good way to do that would be make sure that there's enough gas in your tank, plus to perform in the moment. And what we find is that the aligned behaviors, the more aligned a behavior is with you truly, with your personal, closely held set of values, the more efficient they ultimately are. And that includes hard work, by the way. You hear all those stories about like Kobe Bryant's of the world. You guys have social media? That's a joke, right? But I think we are rethinking that, by the way, as a society. But my assumption is that you've grown up with it. So Kobe Bryant. Whenever you come across something on social media that's like the key to success is blank, please pause for a moment, because the truth is that was the key to success for that person, and it cannot be scaled in any full way. You follow me on that? What worked for Kobe Bryant worked for Kobe Bryant. Doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Now, can you learn lessons and see people at the highest order of their performance, and can you learn from those folks? For sure. The question should still be, is this aligned with me and what makes me tick and my most efficient outcomes? So if waking up at 4:30 every day to get a gym session in isn't aligned with you, fine. If putting up 1,000 shots after practice isn't aligned with you, fine. I do hesitate on that. I worry about that, because the truth is that's what worked for him, and that's fantastic. Okay, but it wasn't as effortful for him, and that's the thing that people don't always see. You guys, I'm going to swear just a little, not too much, Mike, I promise, but you guys are badasses. That's a fact. You probably have a work ethic that surpasses most of the human race, I'd suggest. Okay, that's my assumption coming into this. all right? But that's got to be part of you. Kobe Bryant did what he did, but like my dad can't pull that and use it and have it be effective, okay? The degree of effort to get to the place that he was for my dad, because it wasn't as aligned, is significantly lower or greater on an individualized scale. Does that make sense? It's kind of a big idea, but I hope that does make sense at least to a degree. Misaligned behaviors are what we call high burn behaviors, okay? And that could be anything. That could be that rehearsing arguments thing. Anyone ever worry about performance? Do we know what self-talk is in the room? Is that a familiar term? Just like that dialogue going on in your head pretty much at all times, okay? If you're rehearsing conversations, if you're constantly worrying and anticipating negative outcomes, that's a high burn behavior, okay? And the recognition there, again, don't feel bad if you do that. We're just gonna try to move toward a healthier place. The trouble with it is that in the brain, worry and preparation walk pretty similar paths. Does that make sense? So if you're thinking through possible scenarios, that's prep, that's fine, that's good. But if you let that turn into what we call tractionless thinking, like rehearsing an argument with someone, trying to anticipate how they might react to you without ever having the willingness to go actually talk to them, that's tractionless thinking. It doesn't have roots on the actual ground. And that can really burn up a lot of energy, empty your gas tank unnecessarily, okay? So we try to, I should have mentioned, when I was studying human development and psychology, my focus was cognitive neuroscience, so I'll throw some brain stuff out there, I'll try not to go too deep. But good and bad, that's kind of polarized thinking, okay? Like, is any behavior good or bad inherently? You could make the argument that ethically there are categories for sure, but when it comes to this, making certain ethical assumptions, the question is only, is it aligned or misaligned? And if it's misaligned, that's not necessarily bad, it's just eating up a lot of your fuel. Anyone put health down or something close to it? Health, yeah, okay. Eating junk food, that's not bad, but when it comes to the value of health, it might be fast and easy and taste delicious, but it's gonna be high burn because now you create a hole that you've gotta dig yourself out of, hypothetically. A TV binge, there's no judgment in this. Let's say hypothetically you go through a few seasons of Real Housewives of any city. That's not bad, right? But you made a choice, and those hours can't re-enter your life. Sir?
I have a question. So, we're talking about like things that are aligned and misaligned. What if you have two values, and for one a behavior is aligned for that, and for another it's not aligned?
Are you a coach?
No.
Oh, you're a high-level thinker. That's good. Oh, you go to Columbia?
Yeah.
Okay, there it is. That's a great. Can you give us?
So yeah. So like, for in season, for me, it's energy efficient for me to sit and watch TV for 3 hours, and because it takes my mind off things, and I can just sit on the couch, relax, and not worry about anything. But maybe it goes against some of my so that I think that benefit my wrestling and benefit like rest and relaxation, which I value.
Sure.
But maybe it goes against some of my other values of like
friendships or something.
Yeah, friendships or like financial freedom, where I could be spending that time to do something else.
Absolutely. And this is where, you're pushing us down the road a little bit, but I love that. So that's a great question. Everyone get the idea? And we probably all have stuff like that. Social and health. Maybe your friends want to go out to whatever, 3 in the morning doing whatever people do in college at 3 in the morning. That's fair. So setting boundaries around what's most important now, given the timeline, is one. There is sort of a hierarchy in these values. These are your most closely held ones, but I would make the case that, if we had to, if you had to cross some of these things off, which would be a tall task. Family's here, and for me, let's see, curiosity, learning was one of my big ones. So if I have to be with my family instead of digging into a book that I want to read, there's a hierarchy there. So we do have to you do have to kind of prioritize, but that can shift. And that's why there's no one true pathway to getting this done. I would say, and this is good. So let's say TV binge. Okay, so TV. I would say, why are we doing this and what do we think it's accomplishing? I think I heard rest and relaxation.
Yeah.
Okay, recovery, putting, refueling. I would say if that's priority one, given the timeline and the task at hand and the pinnacle vision and all those things you have to do, then bump it up to the top. I also think it's fair to reevaluate if this is the only way that you can get there. Fair enough. I would say, and this is why we're complex humans, we always talk about concept over script, meaning there is no exact script for anything ever, just to be clear. But having a tight hold on the concept makes sense. So say you need this rest and relaxation, but you also are recognizing that socially or whatever, your friendships might be suffering at the moment. Hypothetically, these are two of your closely held values. This as it relates to health, friends as the other. Do you have any friend who would be willing to just sit and chill with you? I can't have the high level task of starting a business and pushing forward on my entrepreneurial efforts, and I don't really want to go out to 3 a.m., but do you have 2 or 3 folks who are willing to get into this space with you? And together, can we decide, do we want to watch TV? Do we want to, I don't know, what else? Watch Shark Tank. There you go. Watch Shark Pick Shark Tank. There you go. Now you got a little bit of that financial freedom going, potentially. But does that make sense? So if you can align them, fantastic. And the other truth is, and you guys know this, you're disciplined people, sometimes you have to distinguish between want and need, and the needs have to come before the want. Does that make sense? I need to eat. I want to eat the Snickers bar, okay? But I've got this kind of roadmap in place. Health is more important, so I'm gonna take a little extra time and find something else. So concept and script, want versus need, those are big ideas. Does that make sense at all? Is that helpful? Yeah. And by the way, easier said than done. We're not getting too prescriptive yet, but that's a great thing to acknowledge. This is a mantra. It's long for a mantra, but I'll tell you, I work with folks and I'll give little bits of, it's not in the thing yet. I'll give little bits of what I use, the strategies I've used that have transcended domain, meaning whether it's professional or Olympic athletes, powerful CEOs in corporate real estate, because I also work in that world. In terms of high performance, I've got people who have this on the background of their phone or paste it up on their computer. You don't always have to be right, so you don't always have to get it exactly right. It's in quotes because right is sometimes, all the time, subjective. Most of the time subjective. You should operate thoughtfully. Have humility when we don't get it right. Forgive yourself and those around you and be willing to adapt. And this is, when I put stuff up like this in a group like this, I'm like, does that sound soft? It might, that's okay. But I'll tell you right now, especially working with people through the pandemic and stuff like that, the people who had an inability to adapt, the ones that were rigid and frozen, and what they thought was the right way to go about their business, their relationships, their training, whatever, those are the ones that fell behind. So this is ultimately what we're getting to. We're putting things into play, we're getting feedback on our methods, on our wrestling, on our strategy, on our training, on all those things. Can we adapt in the presence of that feedback is the question. And if we are, think about this, if we are holding on to grudges and resenting the people around us, if we don't have humility and we're constantly pointing at the things in our environment instead of reflecting on the role that we could have played, if we're not being thoughtful, if we're being reactive, and we're really, this is touching on the perfectionist tendency, if we are all of those things, adaptability is the thing that suffers, okay? And there's never been a high performer, at least not one that's sustained success for a long time, that hasn't been able to pivot well. Have you experienced that even in your own wrestling and training? Yeah? It's real. Does anyone have, what's on people's minds right now? Yeah?
I'm a coach of Steve. I coach in Franklin and Washington. I'm looking at it kind of from a different perspective.
Sure.
But kind of the same thing with him in that aspect, like my working with the administrative side of things, as opposed to working from the coaching side of things. I have to be very different people.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for me to have my attitude in the wrestling room, how I coach my athletes, and have that same attitude working with our athletic director and people within the academia and the school. And that's what's really difficult for me to stay in alignment,
That's
without
right.
getting misaligned.
That's absolutely right. And I would suggest that probably goals shift depending on the situation. If I'm trying to hype up a team, or if I'm trying to get my point across in a boardroom, or whatever it might be, the presentation, those sorts of things can shift. They shift best when the core set of values is in place. And that's the thing that I would say, because yeah, the world is freaking complicated and hard, and ungrading it can be a real challenge. So coming back to these foundational ideas, that really matters. Yeah, because it does become hard, for sure. And that's like, I'm on a variety of committees, and that's one of the first things that I bring up in any of those committee meetings, is like, what are we after in this situation?
Yeah, and looking back to that stuff, that's where it's even more complicated for me, because I still have that competitive nature in me, like I'm training, and I want to take care of my body, but it gets so convoluted with so many different, getting pulled in different directions and whatnot, and the exactly what you said, the misalignment and the alignment sometimes, cross paths a lot of times. And I'm working on my own mental health, my own awareness and gratitude and stuff.
And do you burn a lot of gas in those situations?
I overwork myself, and I overextend myself so much to my friends and family, to my athletes, to my job, to my personal life, to pickleball, and all that stuff. Yeah.
For sure. And that's, I'm sorry to hear that, but I will normalize and say it's super common. It's super common, and that's why I'm excited that these coaches have brought you guys in here at this time, because the earlier we can onboard these things, it's not going to make the world easy, but it might give you a chance to approach challenges in a different way. I'd love to chat more about that at some point.
Yeah, because I'm trying to give them, the 40-year-old perspective when they're done.
That matters. That matters. Well, that's the thing. Life lessons, right? Like if it doesn't last for life, is it the lesson that we suppose? It's meaningful to think back on. I'll remember when I first transitioned from purely athlete-focused performance to corporate development and things like that. I was working with athletes transitioning to business, and I remember having to tell one gentleman who was a great guy and a high achiever, like, dude, you cannot fullback the board meeting anymore. Because if he took that same approach, just trying to knock people out of the way, same intensity, because this was a skill set he had learned. And it's amazing to know that you've got that, but only to be able to only tag it in when you need it, and when it applies to the situation. That's one of the challenges of being an advanced human. Yes, sir.
So it's like one thing to recognize like what misaligns us, but I guess my question is, when we feel ourselves in those situations where we are getting misaligned, how do we realign ourselves?
That's fantastic. The does your behavior match your goal thing is part of that. So if we have not yet clearly identified what the goal is, what our values are, like if you haven't done that work, it's like the friggin' Wild West. There's no way to come back to the baseline, to the bedrock, right? So I would suggest that. We're going off script, but I'm totally comfortable with that. If you're off, if you recognize that you're misaligned, don't judge it for one. Okay, and that's like one of those, there's a conversation in leadership. Self-deception is one of the biggest performance degrading mindsets that any leader or high-performing athlete can have, self-deception. So just having judgment-free awareness of it is always step one. You just catch it. You catch it, you don't judge it. I did this, I wanted to do that. I'm a certain distance from my values or my goals. How do I close that distance? We're going to work on this today. Awareness, then understanding. This might be too advanced, so if we're going too fast, I apologize. Awareness, understanding, intention. So bring awareness to the misalignment. Work to understand what it is, why it happened, why it's misaligned. I'll tell you right now, one from the understanding perspective, we'll talk about this on the next slide, so I may as well just hit it. One thing that's not always obvious to folks is how physiological bedrock components like nutrition, movement, and sleep play into the rest of your life. So if you are in a constant state of sleep deprivation and you're having trouble unbraiding the complexities of the modern world as coach, administrator, whatever it might be, to recognize, to be able to become aware that something's off, understand how sleep might be impacting cognitive performance, make intentional decisions in the presence of this awareness and understanding, put it into play and review whether it worked or not, and then synthesize this new understanding into your mental model. That's hard. We actually came up with this. We work with some of the rowers too. We call it putting the oars in the water. Columbia, that's not how you spell oars, but but you get it. So does that make sense? So it's just a conscious, intentional reappraisal of what's going on. And the judgment-free part is freaking huge. Huge. All right, so I'll talk about this for a second. It might lend itself to some of those more complicated situations. So eat, move, sleep. Language, communication, relationships. Gap capacities, that's the stuff like, I'm sure you've heard of this plenty of times, but grit, resilience, growth mindset, like any of these difficult, sometimes difficult to define, but far, studied more and more. Empathy is a legitimate thing, especially if you're on a team. That's where those capacities fit. Highest order performance is you at your best, like Paul suggested. You at your best in whatever domain you're choosing, in whatever way you want it to come to life. So when you get to that pinnacle vision, that's where we're aiming. Okay? And then one of the tasks as you move forward is understanding how all of this fits together. It's not as complicated as it seems. It's a nice, easy self-check. But if I want to be up there, and I am, whatever, I'm on routinely 4 hours of sleep, hypothetically, I've abbreviated my bedrock foundation level. So my highest order of performance, you can still maximize what you got, you just don't have as much. Does that make sense? Not a problem, unless it doesn't align with your goals. All right, so I'm gonna talk through this a little bit. There's just a note section. This is page, I think, 5. Page 5 of the workbook. Just notes. If you ever want to do a self-assessment on this, please feel free. Gap capacities, let's talk about growth mindset. People have heard that, correct? Has anyone not heard of a growth mindset? Everyone's heard of it? Joey Donuts? You've heard of it? Good man. What's your real name? Brian. Brian, that's even better. All right, so one of those ideas would be, so growth mindset. By nature of this sport, and I would suggest life on the whole, you are going to have challenges, setbacks, like it's not going to be easy, okay? The question really is going to be not how do we eliminate challenges from our life, but how do we approach it? Fair enough? Okay, growth mindset, the distinguishing factor in growth mindset really comes down to, I won't bore you with all the studies, but it comes down to, can you use self-talk? Can you tap into the inner narrative to reframe the challenge and make sure that there are opportunities for you within it? Does that make sense? So if you're walking a path and you hit a hurdle or a roadblock, it's paired up with a fixed mindset, and you say, oh, it's over. But I can't beat this guy, or whatever it might be. That's a fixed mindset, right? Like, it is what it is. I've got no agency in that. But a growth mindset would suggest that, like, okay, I just ran into a hurdle in the road. What can I do to get around it, to go over it? I'm not pretending the problem's not there, but what are my choices within it? Can I eventually grow from it? One of the most famous studies on growth mindset comes from a math classroom. You heard this before? You probably heard of it, yeah. A math classroom. So what they did was they took students, advanced students, broke them up into 2 groups. And they are getting A's on all they're just crushing their assignments. For group 1, every time they win, every time they do well on a test, they're praised for their ability. They're saying, oh, fantastic, you're so smart. Another A, you've done it again, you're so good at this. And they're praised on count. The second group is praised, but it's like, great job. You must have worked so hard. You probably took advantage of the study hours. Well done. Same kind of idea. The kid gets the same feeling of being supported, but broken into those 2 categories, they let that ride for a while. And then down the road, they took them into a test that they could not pass, material that they had never studied before, that kind of thing. So these advanced kids are failing for the first time probably in their lives academically. And then they just watched. They just sat back and watched. And you can probably guess how this story ends. But group 1, who's praised on talent, when they hit the hurdle, all of a sudden they're reflecting in their inner narrative. The way they think about this challenge is, shoot, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Maybe I'm not as talented as the teacher told me. All those kinds of things. Self-doubt starts to creep in. Group 2 is like, shoot, maybe I didn't take advantage of the study hours. Remember that time I was watching TV? Man, I should have studied harder. So you've just predisposed their approach to the same objective outcome just by the way that we've coached them, or by the way our inner narrative has been cultivated. Does that make sense? Growth mindset. It all stems from ability to use language. Okay? You cannot have a growth mindset without having some ownership over your self-talk and the way you name obstacles. Does this make any sense? If you are, yes?
So what's like the end result of that study? Is it kind of end a little flat and then they're just observational, or?
Because it was students, they had to bring them back together and coach them all up. They didn't like track them over 30 years down this growth. But you can imagine, of course, and this is subjective to a degree, how those other kids were experiencing challenges in other areas as they went forward. So they eventually took the growth mindset approach to all students. But does that make sense? It's a good question. So inner narrative, growth mindset, is dependent on an inner narrative and having some agency, control over how you engage with conflicts. Pretty well documented that if you are sleep deprived, you actually have less access to your full language. Okay, it's one of the first things to go. The rationale behind it is when the body, like your number one goal is survival. Okay, that's programmed into you. Your task number one, forget about the hierarchy, it's make it to the next day. So if there's anything at this bedrock physiological level that is challenging you to the point where like, hey man, something's really off, then the body has some magnificent adaptive capacities, and it just deprioritizes really high level creative cognition and reprioritizes, and we gotta get some rest. Or we gotta picture thirst. If you are super thirsty, there's one priority above all else. Does that sound familiar for some of you guys? Okay, fair enough. So there's this reordering, this hierarchical reordering inside of you that's hard to overcome. So if you're constantly sleep deprived, you just don't have access to high level cognition in the same way, which means you have less access to all these cool skills that your coach has been giving you over time, which means it'll be tougher to reach the mountaintop. Yeah.
So not to get too physiological, but like,
go for it.
Can one of the bedrocks kind of recover for a lack of the other bedrock?
That's a great question. No. I'm really glad you said that, because actually my entry into this work, anyone heard of the book Spark, John Rady? Anyone ever heard the idea that exercise can like stimulate neural activity and things like that? You may have seen some stuff like that. So there's all these studies on the way that exercise and movement can improve cognition and all sorts of other positive things. So we entered some study actually in grad school on movement. We're like, can we create a 20-minute, this was our goal, can we create a 20-minute bout of movement based on research, put it into practice, and accomplish these high-level goals? And we put it across domains: academic, ability to focus. We looked into relationships and emotion regulation, stuff like that. Can we use exercise to boost that? And the answer was yes, but with an asterisk. And it was except in the population, in our group at least, that was at 6.5 hours of sleep or less. So exercise can absolutely stimulate neural activity. It cannot overcome sleep deprivation. The only thing that can overcome sleep deprivation is sleep or rest. Does that make sense? And I would suggest that one of the reasons that we put that study together was because we were very in tune with some of the modern educational landscape. This is what they call maybe like 0-hour PE or early morning physical education that was trying to get kids up and moving to give them a better shot to be focused as they entered the day. And it works like gangbusters, except if whatever the structure was, like say you got a dual meet till you don't get back to campus till 11:30 at night, okay, and then you got to get up early the next morning. It worked until that happened, right? So, but I would say this: it can be a bridge. Does that make sense? So, like, if you're here, you can maybe tag some strategies in these other categories to get you over the bridge, but eventually the work that's done in these moments has to be done. Is that fair? It's a great question. I like this. You bring up very practical. This is good, real world stuff. This is in your books too, if you want. This is just one of the publications behind this framework. And actually, we mentioned this yesterday, the case study behind it has to do with wrestlers, really high achieving wrestlers who were using early morning training to build toughness and resilience in their team. That feels totally fair. What they were running into were a set of downstream hurdles that they did not anticipate at first. So the coach was coming to us with things like, hey, we've never dealt with this before, but I feel like what we're trying to communicate to our athletes is just not landing for the first time in a while. Little things. It was like when the bus is going to leave for the meet, or what, stuff like that. It wasn't landing the same way. The secondary concern was we are having a real problem with making our weight this year. And we started to dig in. We started to evaluate. You may or may not know this, but we just talked about how sleep deprivation limits cognition, attention, retention, all things like that. What it also does is it changes the hormone production in your body. So things like, you ever, this is going to get too deep, but ghrelin. Oh, you heard it? Yeah, amazing. So what happens is there's these hormones that are naturally produced to push you toward a place of energy procurement through nutrition. And satiation means you feel full, you feel good. In a state of sleep deprivation, they invert, they flip, because there's kind of alarm bells in the body saying something's not right here. Let's prioritize what's coming in. So let's go for more calorie-dense food, more high-calorie food, to make sure that we can get on to the next day. You felt that before? Yeah.
We got a 4-month-old.
Okay, there you go. Have you put on weight? That's not a judgment. Yeah. Hit the gym a little bit, you changed to muscle mass, I don't know. No. But it's a real thing to be in tune with. And it's one of those like under the surface things we didn't, and the way we engage with this coach is like, okay, we made a decision, you set something, you put something in play with thoughtfulness. This was trying to accomplish a goal that you had, and that's great. There's these other goals that aren't being met, and there might be something in the ecosystem here that we need to address. So one of their solves was like they were just really in tune with when they let the guys out after practice. We're not staying late. If we're doing early mornings, we're not staying late. If we've got a late tool meet, tomorrow morning's practice is canceled. And maybe a lot of this is happening already for you guys, but that's why the judgment thing is, or the lack of judgment is so important. Coach, you didn't do anything wrong. It was a great idea. We tried it, we're getting this other feedback. Let's make some subtle adjustments to make sure it fits for your athletes. Yeah. Make sense? Yes, sir.
So I got a question, especially during school year, I struggle with it. Like there's practicality and then there's like real life situations, especially with grass, because it's like things are gonna run late, but you gotta get up at 6 in the morning. So how would you manage that?
That's a great question. I always come back to baseline and making sure that your priorities in order. So once you have that solid, then you can navigate kind of a mobile, dynamic environment. What I would say is if you are sleep deprived, you're tough enough to get through the day anyway. That's my suggestion. And I think you gotta own that. The question after that would be though, should you set up a life in that image? Does that make sense? Yep. So every once in a while, your schedule makes it so that you gotta go through a day on 5 hours. Okay, do it. Do it. You're gonna be fine. You're talented enough, you're tough enough, you can make that happen. I would say that as you go into that day sleep deprived, you might want to keep that in mind. Not be like on edge about it, but recognize that like if you get into a complicated conversation with a significant other or a friend and you're on 5 hours of sleep, have the awareness to be like, hey, maybe we need to press pause on this and come back to it, at least until I can get a little rest. You know what I'm saying? So, but having these bits of understanding in place, the hope is that it better equips you to kind of move with your setting, because it'll never be perfect. And that's a great question to bring up. I'll throw this out. Everyone's in school here right now, right? Okay, so I'll throw this out there. Long studies, cramming for tests, it doesn't work. You know that, right? Okay, I'm just saying, so the question might become, go back to that gas tank thing. Now instead of the body, think of the mind. If you want to perform well on a test the next day, you can stay up late, and input all you want. You just probably will not have access to it the next day, not at least in the way that you think. Does that make sense? And folks, I'll tell you, and I work with a lot of high achievers in your age range especially. Sorry. It's tragic is what it is, because they really believe that like self-deprivation, more, another club, more study, another hour in the books is the way that they're going to get to their highest order of performance, not recognizing that they're actually degrading it. So if you go into, on 8 hours of sleep, the way you go engage with projects the next day is going to be better than engaging the same project on 5 hours of sleep. In the business world, we talk to people all the time. You want to add more hours to your day by waking up early or staying up late and do more, that's fine. But you're doing more at about 65% capacity, right? And any math folks in the room? Yeah, 60, okay, fair enough. But 60 more at 65% capacity versus whatever. Get to bed 2 hours early, and now you've got 85, 95% capacity. That plays out better for you over time, plus all the supplemental benefits to your athletic career and things like that. Yes, sir.
Is it bad to get like too much sleep? So like on the weekends, if you're sleeping for like 12 hours, is that a problem?
I don't think so. But it depends. It certainly depends. I would say we're on a different time clock today. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. That's a great question. I think if you're in tune enough with yourself, it shouldn't be an issue. But if you're sleep deprived all week and your body's telling you to stay in bed for 12 hours on Sunday, I think it's okay to listen to it, as long as it's not getting in the way. What we ask some people, and this is a football term, but we call it an untimed down. So if you feel like you're grinding for a while, it's just like, get some dark in the room, make sure it's cool, turn the alarm off, wake up when your body's ready to wake up. So am I too sedentary? Is a fair question too. Absolutely. And that's why it's not just sleep better and you're gonna go win a championship, or train more and you're gonna go win a championship, or eat better, you know what I mean? They have to behave in concert. We've got to be conscious of all of them. And this is, and it's funny because everyone gets this. Like rationally, people understand it. If you are malnourished, sedentary, and sleep deprived, you are not going to fulfill your potential. Everyone gets that. And yet, it's like the first thing to go, especially for high achievers. It's like they are so willing to do less of this, and probably not in your world, but maybe in other situations, and they'll just eat junk out of the vending machine and be sedentary all day and sleep less because they think they're moving towards some incredible goal, not recognizing how the whole puzzle fits together. It's a really good question. I would say if you do have, just to get real practical, if you do have one of those long days, get up and move. Your body needed the 12 hours, go get the 12 hours, get up, go for a walk, move. Anyway, this all makes sense? Okay. SAID principle. Have we heard of this? It's not in the book, but it is working toward page 6. SAID principle. Any exercise physiology majors? There we go. All right. What do you guys study? No math? No sports? What's your major?
Me?
Yeah. You and you. I want to know both. Go first.
Dean, I'm a psych major.
Hi, Dean. Psych, perfect.
Yeah.
My boy, Dean.
A lot of the stuff you were saying, I've seen in class before.
For sure.
Like, you grew up in the fixed mindset, pretty
Pretty common in those.
Yeah.
That's common language in those areas. What I would say, Dean, is that a lot of what's missing from some of those psych classes is the physical part. Yeah. So it's like you can have all of these skills up top, but if you're not taking care of the bedrock foundational pieces down below, it's like icing a cake that's not fully baked. You just won't have access to those high order skills. It's a great call. What's your major?
undergraduate.
Are you in grad right now?
Yeah.
What is it now?
So I was in kinesiology and
Oh, cool.
yeah.
Amazing. Kinesiology, I don't know if this came across your plate. SAID principle stands for specific adaptation to imposed demand. It's like one of the fundamental truths of strength training and athlete development, which is the world that I fit in more often than not. Specific adaptation to imposed demand. This happens for body and mind. So it really is a freaking miracle what you've got, body and mind. It is so adaptable if you give it the chance to adapt. But it adapts in specific relationship to the demands you impose on it. Okay, and if we move to other sectors, if you're trying to be a champion powerlifter, and your training routine includes running marathons every other weekend, you'll get fitter, you'll get tougher, so you'll check some boxes. You're probably not going to be a champion powerlifter. Flip that, the same idea is true. You want to be a champion marathon runner, you don't need to squat 800 pounds. Okay, it's obvious enough in a training world, but it's funny how if we're not conscious and intentional about these decisions, which ultimately will become our habits, our operating standard, they will become super normalized and we will adapt to them whether we're aware of it or not, in a really specific way. Does that make sense? So the question now, we'll take a little time on this page. We think about keeping the tank full enough so that we have access to our skills when we need them most. Okay? Let's start to write down, and you can refer back to that other page if you want. What are some of our high burn behaviors? High burn behaviors, the stuff that's just totally misaligned with who we are, but we've caught ourselves falling into those traps now. Do it without judgment. You spend, I know you got the screen time report, you spend 8 hours a day on your screen. Okay, some smirks, maybe it's more. But if that is misaligned, don't judge it, but note it. Let's also think about our more efficient and aligned behaviors, because we don't just want to point out where we're missing the mark. Let's also acknowledge where we're getting it right. And again, this is yours, no one else has to see, you can come back to it. And I hope this judgment-free appraisal of alignment or misalignment, I hope it's something we can refer back to. I would suggest that it's always important to have both columns. Okay, it's always important to have both columns. If you just sit in the place of what am I doing wrong, that feels like the right thing to do, and that's another common thing. These are the places in which I can improve. Important to take note of that. But recognizing where you're kind of getting it right and repeating those behaviors, that part is equally important. You got to keep things steady. And we'll talk about that now. So on the next page, we'll talk about optimism. There's two questions, and when I do this, whether it's in the build of team culture or company culture, you can even take this into personal relationships if you want to. Optimism is essential. Are you maintaining it, and are you earning it? Okay, so we call it the OCD team model. I won't go into it fully today, but if you're on a team, when you walk into the room every day, one of your first tasks is to maintain optimism about the people with whom you share a purpose. And it's not always easy, but it's necessary. It's an onboarding routine that we put people through. It is part of the culture of the teams that we work with. Maintain optimism about the people with whom we share a purpose. And if it's absolutely impossible, that means you either reflect a little bit, why can't I get to this place? Or you reassess, am I around the right people? Okay, so maintain optimism. That doesn't mean gloss over problems. Doesn't mean see the world through rose-colored glasses and pretending things aren't going wrong. What it means is that you are going to hold on to tightly the idea that whatever we're up against, we can get through it. We can get to the other side of this thing. It's the task of keeping the light lit at the end of the tunnel, and it's an absolute necessity. So you've got to maintain it about the people that you share a purpose with. You have to. And then you have to earn it back from them, because they've been given the same guidance. Does that make sense? So get the job done. If you're asked to do a job, get the job done. Earn their optimism because it's coming to you. And all of a sudden you can see how that cycle builds on itself. And if optimism doesn't sound like a high performance mindset strategy, Martin Seligman, some people call him the godfather of positive psychology. He's a researcher, he's got all sorts of good stuff. He has developed workshops that they do with the US Army. So they teach some of the toughest dudes on the planet about this. They're installing optimism in people who are literally going to go do some of the hardest jobs that anyone could possibly imagine. Why is this important? Maybe you can guess, but I would say this. If you are face down in the mud somewhere, taking fire, what could possibly get you up and moving forward toward the challenge if there's not at least a little bit of optimism? Courage, absolutely. Toughness, absolutely. Commitment to mission, absolutely. And down below all of that is optimism. You don't get up and press forward unless at least part of you believes that you've got a shot. Does But the boxer, maybe applies to wrestling as well, but the boxer is bruised and beaten and down on the mat, okay? He doesn't get up and step forward unless he believes that there's still a shot. If you can just get up and step forward and keep trying. That's optimism, okay? You can put it in the category of softness, but it is the fuel for resilience and toughness and all of that stuff. They work in concert. They're not enemies. I love this piece. So I was going to do a workshop in Dallas, and I just came across this street art. I snapped a picture real quick and put it in the slideshow. I was like, that is so right. Optimism starts with you. That's just not a feel-good statement. In part, what this says to me is it's a recognition that if you are banking on the world giving you enough positive feedback to make you feel good all the time, that's a heavy ask of the world. Right? It really has to be cultivated internally, and you take it into whatever environments you go to. You think about this, like, well, I'm just going to go right to this study because it will make sense for the rest of it. Ramen. Do you like ramen? Anyone? Me too. All right, so there's this study where they bring people like you into a room and they set pages out in front of them just the way it is now, and they hook them up to EEG. So they're trying to measure brain activity while they're engaging with the experiments I'm about to explain. 3 bowls of soup. They're asked to taste them all, and before they do, they're given a little preamble by the experimenters. This is just a regular bowl of ramen. This is just the ramen that we make. This bowl of ramen is enhanced with a delicious umami flavor. This bowl of ramen we added some monosodium glutamate to. That's how they've prefaced this for the people. And they asked them to rank them 1 through 3. Which one did they like the best? Which one, like, how did that fall in order? If you just had to take a wild guess, what would you think?
Probably the second one.
The second one, delicious umami flavor. Fair. Anyone have a different guess? So you know the term. Monosodium glutamate, MSG, fair enough. So you're guessing here? Okay, so the big reveal is it's all the same bowl of soup. Okay, it's all the same ramen. Each one of them has had MSG added to it. Monosodium glutamate is MSG. It has a delicious umami flavor, and that's just how they make it, right? So it's all the same bowl of soup. But people are ranking these things, and they are reporting more enjoyment with the delicious umami ramen. So they are reporting that, yeah, that was my favorite for sure. Science is all about curiosity. So the question is, okay, are they just saying what we want to hear? So now they read the neural mapping. The pleasure centers of the brain in the presence of the second bowl of soup were lit up way higher than in the presence of the other two. So they were actually enjoying that experience more. Question?
So could you technically be like, at the beginning of practice, like, this is going to be the best practice ever, everything?
Dude, you get it. Yeah, you could. And it's, maybe you've heard of confirmation bias. Maybe that's the term. You've heard that before. Confirmation bias, it all plays into the same idea. It's like, yeah, if you go into a classroom, you're like, this is going to be boring. I hate this class. It's going to be boring. Every slow moment that day will be confirmation of this image that you hold of the class. You go into the same class and like, man, I'm interested in this. Like, this is going to be fun. This is going to be interesting. Every interesting moment, and there will be some, is going to be confirmation of that. And the question is like, which one of those? We're not going to pretend. It's not about pretending, but it's like, which one of those is more important? Pointing out the slow moments of a course, or recognizing and holding on to the interesting ones. And they call it the expectation effect. The way we set our expectations absolutely factors into how we experience our environment. Coach.
Yeah, so from a coaching perspective,
Yeah.
I can't come in there with that kind of attitude, but almost setting the realistic expectation. Today is going to be a hard-ass practice. Get yourself ready.
Yeah.
Like, is there a converse kind of? Are you going to go to it, or?
I would say not at all, but you lead me right to this slide, so I appreciate that. No, I think that's good, and that's real. Because when we talk about, this is for us athletes. You see how I said us? This is I still play pickleball. This is for the athlete. The coaches have decisions to make too, and that's where to set the thresholds. Like, we can't just make a fairyland playground atmosphere of practice every time. But what we can, if you set expectations, what we as athletes then have the opportunity to do is recognize the difference between obligation and opportunity for one. Right? If you say it's gonna be a hard practice, there's two things that can click in, like, I'm not ready for this. Or, hell yeah, like I'm gonna get that much better today. Okay, I can handle this. I've been through this stuff before. I'm gonna get that much better today. I am not a good runner, I'll own that. But I'll say this, I'll do a 5K now and then. And for sure, whenever there's a hill, this is just the athlete clicking, I'm like, okay, now is when I'm gonna start to beat people. There's a hill, they can't handle this the way I can handle this. You know, so it's like, it's just approaching the same thing. It doesn't make it actually easier. It changes the way you engage with the hard thing. So if coach says it's gonna be a hard practice, it's gonna be a tough one, strap in, great. What a great opportunity to get better. So this is kind of mapping how appreciation and resentment, okay, vertical axis, how much you appreciate the moment, how much you know what resentment feels like, that's that inner dialogue taking over too, versus obligation and opportunity. If I get to be here, if you get to come out to Colorado Springs and get to engage in a difficult practice, you're far more likely to appreciate that. Rarely does it work so linearly, right? But it's challenging. You can imagine. How do you see something as a great opportunity and then resent it? Those don't usually fit together. On the other side, same thing. Dragging your feet into a practice. Oh man, I got to do this. This sucks. You begin, that inner dialogue begins to change. You start to resent every bit of feedback the coach gives you on that tough day when it's an obligation, not an opportunity. You see it as an opportunity, you go through hard stuff, your coach gives you feedback, you are getting better, and you have to hold that as a real truth of the experience. If you do, gas stays in the tank, your performance improves. That's how it works. It's a great question. There's a whole other side to this sort of presentation that focuses on developing environments to bring that stuff to life. And then maybe every once in a while you start to practice with a game like dodgeball. You know, just throw something in there randomly.
They know, yeah.
They've been there?
Yeah, I'm pretty good at,
Mixing.
because I've lived in the suck for so long. You know?
Yeah.
But I have that good perspective of when it is time to adjust based off of their attitude, energy.
That's right.
To build them up, and you have to beat them down as well. But in the sport, you just gotta embrace them.
You gotta work. Well, and here, this is an important part of it too. The said principle, you're adapting, you've got to expand the top end threshold. You've got to do hard stuff to be able to do more hard stuff. So you've got to push the top end threshold of your ability, for sure. And then just make sure that we're not riding at the top threshold all the time and we're out of gas by the time it actually matters. It's a great way to think about it. Okay, so I'm gonna risk rushing through some of this back end work, but like I said, I'm willing to talk about this all day. We can come back to it later. This is an important model. You kind of glossed over page 8. I'd ask that you do that on your own at some point. It's a really, really important one, like that obligation opportunity thing. If you can just write down negative thoughts and how to reframe them into positive thoughts. And this is not positive for like everything's perfect positive, but it's gonna be a tough practice. This sucks, or what a good opportunity to get better. Little things like that. Okay, this is one of the most impactful frameworks that my team and I ever put together. It is changing the world for people, and I try not to be an overstater. I really mean that. It's changed my life. Okay, it's called the CARE model. We're inputting this in a lot of organizations. It's really important. It begins with the recognition that we started today with. That's the thickest bracket. This is the safest piece, the least adaptive piece of the whole thing. It's the self. It's you. You matter. You are valuable, and you don't have to do anything to prove it. Please know that's true. Like, you matter on this earth. I don't care if you ever wrestle another match. I've never seen you wrestle one before. You matter. And that's almost, I'll tell you, it's almost an uncomfortable thing for people to get in tune with. When I work at people at really high levels, I'll tell you, I had a conversation one time with someone who was objectively successful. Money in the bank, sort of, it'd be hard to argue with the idea that this person is successful. They were sad. There's a tragic amount of sad people living in mansions, I'll tell you that, at the front end of your life. Could not disconnect their behavior from their self-worth. Meaning if they didn't hit their sales numbers for the term, whatever it might be, that something was wrong with them. Instead of being able to say something might need to be adjusted in my skills, enhancing my skills, adjusted in my strategies, or maybe I need to investigate the mindset behind all of this, they couldn't break out of that cycle. We call it the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is good. Okay? If you were to come up here and kick me in the leg and you saw that it hurt me, I would hope you feel at least a little bit guilty. It was uncalled for. I'm a pretty nice guy. What did I do? Anyway. But if you see that in me, you should feel a little bit guilty. But guilt should push you back one level. Anytime you put a behavior into the world and get feedback that's like, maybe that wasn't the right behavior, maybe I need to adjust my behavior, it should push you back one level. Okay, you were pissed off, I said something that bothered you, nothing's wrong with you, but maybe you need to find a different strategy to deal with your frustration. Is that fair? So guilt is a guide, as long as you don't wear it too heavily and for too long. It distinguishes itself from shame when you cannot disconnect these two things. Okay, so if you said, of course I hurt. That's the sort of thing I hurt people. I've made this, I can't stop making this mistake. It's me. Bullshit. I would be very sorry, and I am very sorry when I meet people in that place. And it's why we started the day the way we did. We have to recognize that those two are not directly connected. Your behaviors do matter. Okay, what you put into the world does matter. But it's not necessarily a reflection on you. Behaviors, more often than we want to give it credit for, are an emergent property of everything that comes before it. Okay, it emerges from the mindsets and drives, from skills and strategies that we've built in accordance with those mindsets, and the behavior becomes the natural next step. A quick example would be, all of this determined or influenced by physical state and history. Really, really important. The dog walked into the room right now, and some people moved to pet it, and some people backed off to the corner of the room. Neither one of those behaviors is good or bad. But if some people were bit by a dog at a young age, well, that installed something in your nervous system, in your mindset, in your core drives, way down deep, where, pretty straightforward, you built skills and strategies to keep yourself safe should I ever re-enter that situation. And then you behave in a way that makes perfect sense in alignment. Right? It's not weird that someone would back off in the presence of a dog if that's been their history, if it influenced them to this point, because their skills and strategies make perfect sense in alignment with that mindset. Does that make sense to everybody? And I would say that that's kind of low-hanging fruit. That's an easy example, but we're all going through some version of this at any given time. Anyone in the room ever been really defensive? 2 people, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, probably everyone. Okay, what is that? Why would that happen? You ever been you're in a conversation or you're at a practice and all of a sudden you get something wells up in you and you're super defensive? We're not going to unbraid all of this today. It's a long and important task, but that's the behavior that makes most sense. You going on the defense. That's a skill or strategy that you built up for a reason, because at some point in time it was necessary. You felt like you were not in a safe position. You built up certain skills and strategies in the presence of that feeling, and not to get too therapeutic here, probably happens in childhood, right? At a time where you're I could fight back, I could flee the situation, I could freeze, I could try to steady the boat, but these skills and strategies arrive for a reason, and they make perfect sense. And the question, the long form question, if we move to page 9, is if you want true sustainable behavior adjustment, behavior change, and you know better, but you just can't seem to get it right for whatever reason. And I've definitely been there. You know skills and strategies. What's underneath it that's limiting that progress? And by the way, very pro therapy. It's not a soft thing to get an expert to listen to you. Okay, that you go to a doctor. In fact, I would say, just a brief aside, the stigma around mental health is bullshit. Okay, anyone who's talking we got a starting pitcher gets anxious before going on the mound. Okay, we call that sports psychology. But if you're anxious going into a relationship, it's a mental health issue. It's the same freaking thing. It's the human condition. So to go tag in an expert to help you out with it makes complete sense. By the way, and that's not tough. Okay, Tom Brady won. He was 6 Super Bowls deep when he expanded his coaching. He's got 8 coaches, 6 rings, something. It's crazy, and a therapist is one of them. It's not soft. It's performance enhancing, and it makes you feel better. There's nothing wrong with that. But your point is, it's not, that's why I said it, you've got to be skeptical of, like, you see on Instagram, like, just take an ice bath every morning and boom, you got it. No, it's more complicated than that. It's okay. And being willing to, and you're freaking workers, being willing to do a little bit of the work to figure out the why so that you can have a more sustainable behavior change is usually worth it. The way that my engagements usually go is, this is not a sell, at least not until you get to the corporate world. We would do like group leadership training. We break off into smaller emerging leader groups, and then we do one-on-one sessions throughout the month to dig in, because there is no easy answer. There's got to be reflection. And what happens a lot of times, coaches, there's like a really pivotal, like of all the things that you've been through, there might be a pivotal moment or a pivotal set of conditions that if you can shine a light on that, the whole complicated thing begins to unravel in a kind of a healthy way. So it's worth the work. All right, we are almost at the end of this, but so I would ask you, maybe it's some quiet time to reflect on this. What's one behavior you'd like to improve, some skills and strategies you might need to reimagine to change the behavior, and then what might be sitting a little deeper behind it to make sure that happens well. A really low-hanging basic idea on that is I worked with a guy who didn't feel like he was good at public speaking, and the reason he thought that is because he kept saying all the time. And it really did, to be fair to him. But the reason, I just did it kind of there, the reason we're like, how do we change it? Well, we could heavy hand discipline you into not saying, we could put a electrode on you and shock you every time you say or we could dig in just a little bit. And what we start to recognize is that behavior, that was a skill or it was a strategy that he was using to make sure that there was no empty space when he addressed a group. Well, why is that even important? He was in fear that if there was empty space, then he would no longer be viewed as an expert by the people around him. I've got to say something all the time. People are going to doubt me. So you can see that how he built back out. And it's like, dude, you're good. Do you agree if you can be in a calm, cool, relaxed state? These people, it's within a company, that they're not against you. They want to hear what you have to say, and they're probably not going to judge you for a 10-second pause. And once you get to that place, it's amazing how you make a significant enough shift down here, the ums just start to go away. So little things like that, that's obviously, like I said, low-hanging fruit. From a team perspective, you start to recognize that everyone in the ecosystem is their own unique individual. You start to have patience for them, make installs at the mindset level. Are we all on the same page here? Do we all have the same goal? Are we all willing to make optimistic assumptions about our peers? Do we think there's enough talent in the room to overcome any obstacle we might have? If yes, great starting point. Now let's recognize that a behavior, like you ever get a text that's worded a certain way and you're like, what the heck what was that about? You ever seen that before? And you put a period into the text or not? Does that change the feel of the text? Fair enough. So you start to recognize that this interaction is just two behaviors bumping into each other. We should not assume another complex human's intention. We should have the willingness to go engage with them and ask questions. Did you mean what you said? Or what did you mean by you said when you said this? And then the ripple effect is like, you expand that over the culture of the team or an organization, and you've got sort of self-propelling, performance-enhancing, or performance-degrading behaviors. It works. All right, we'll skip this part for now, but when we get to team dynamics, things like this can be really important. This is a nice thing to reflect on. Kimberly, if I miss anything from this is your expertise. Activation, relaxation. That's referring mostly to the nervous system. Positive emotion, negative emotion. Outside influences, but in this case we're talking mostly about owning and navigating our own self-talk. Up here we call it the hot negative zone. Okay? If you get activated in a negative place, you move from things like, all right, something went a little bit wrong. I'm not happy about this. Now I'm irritated. Then I'm frustrated. Then I'm angry. You keep moving out. Activated negative outrage. You can see how that kind of progresses. Hot positive. Happy. Really happy. Maybe joy. Thrilled. And then boom. Full hot positive. Maybe that's the pinnacle vision you had on your sheet. Can't get much better than this. Okay? What we've noticed working with individuals and teams is that far too often, you can't avoid being up here. You cannot avoid it. But the question is, where do you go after being up there? We find over and over again, people are like, man, if I can just get the right moment up here, it'll balance itself out. If I can just get this win, or make this sale, or whatever the heck it is, then all of this hot negative will be worth it. Unfortunately, that's not usually how it works. You might get that, that's fantastic. But we have to pay attention to the lower side of the equation. This is called cool negative, and I'll tell you from an internal standpoint, and definitely from a team culture standpoint, this is the most dangerous place to be. So what happens too often is we drop in terms of nervous system activation from these hot negative moments, and we just come down without working on owning and reframing the experience. Down here you get things like apathy and resentment and dialogue. Coach hates me. That guy's a prick. Whatever it might be. But this is where the dangerous stuff happens. This is culture collapse if we just sit here. This is where the good stuff happens. Cool positive. The emotion that comes with cool positive, chill, is that still a term people use? Yeah, that sounds about right. Your nervous system activation is coming down. You're optimistic about what we might be able to accomplish here. Now you've got access to creativity. Really good and thoughtful season planning training models, unbraiding complicated situations with teammates, peers, whatever it might be. That good work happens here. Okay, now, the reason we put this up here is it's just a diagnostic. Where am I at a given moment? And how do I move lower left? Upper left is great. We got a lot of strategy on how to move upper left. It's out there in space. But when I'm up here, when I find myself up here, what's my next step? Awareness, understand it, forgive it, there's no judgment. Where do I want to go from here? So maybe we even poll the group. Any strategies you can think of that'll pull you down and left when you're in one of those hot zones? Is that a face scratch or a hand raise?
That was a face scratch.
Do you have any ideas though?
Taking some deep breaths.
Deep breaths. Listen, when I was playing football, I think I would have been skeptical. The breathing stuff, it works. Absolutely. It might just, if you take, what kind of deep breathing do you do, if anything?
I'll occasionally hit a limb off, but
Sure.
just in through the nose, out the nose.
Yeah. Perfect. We can give skills and strategies on this if we find, like, if there's anything, like I said, if you want more, we'll give you more. Breathing strategies, there's all sorts of different ways that controlling your own breathing can change your state mentally and physically. It might just give you a small buffer between the moment of hot negative and the way that you respond to it. Okay, and that's actually an important word we probably heard before. Are we responding or are we just reacting? Okay, a thoughtful, high caliber performer would respond. Right? So maybe sometimes that means changing the physiological state. Give yourself just a glimpse of a window to reframe. Okay, this happened, what am I going to do about it? Your best chance is to, yes?
Sometimes I just say why I'm angry. You know what I mean?
Just name it.
Just saying why helps me calm back down. I'm really pissed off right now because you punched me in the face, but
Fair.
I'll get over it.
It's you, man. Or kicked in the leg. Yeah, fair enough. Just naming it. That takes it out of the ether of like generalized frustration. Like, all right, here's what happened. Now you give yourself some space and some grace. You make a thoughtful next step. Anything else on that side? All right. Well, then I'll finish with this one. It's not even on the map. We'll just turn to page 12. All right, and this is where I think you guys have an opportunity to really excel. So stronger together is a term that we use all the time. It's a real thing. In the weight room, it happens more in the weight room than any other place for whatever reason, because the task is so simple, or direct at least, and the impact is so clear. You see people, they'll miss an attempt in the weight room over and over and over again. All of a sudden, you get their team around, they're cheering, they're shouting, and the person seemingly out of nowhere will make an attempt that they had missed 5 times prior. They don't have more gas in their tank physically. You're not stronger after 4 or 5 max effort attempts. But there's something that happens in a culture when your team is around that is undeniable, literal feats of strength when you've got the support of others. All of that comes together in the best ways when you're aligned on some of those fundamental principles, of course. It's like magic. It matters. I would say that this is really important. I chose this guy for sure. I chose that. He's the captain of a team that won a regional, state, and national team powerlifting championships. This guy had the kind of energy that could change the room, any room he walked into. Any room he walked into. I think you all probably have that. That'd be my guess. It might be like leading through behavior. It might be vocal. It might be side conversations in the locker room where you catch people talking shit about your teammates and you pause them. Whatever it might be, you absolutely have potential to make that kind of impact on your team. Okay? And for sure, you will get stronger as an individual and as a group if you're able to pull this thing together. Okay? This matters. So the task here, you don't have to do it now, just for time. Reflect on moments where you perform better, due in part to the support of others. And what are some ways you might be able to help teammates achieve a higher level of performance? And it's interesting in an individual team sport like this. Like, I get that there's sometimes internal competition, but if you really want to be the badass that you think you can be, like, that matters too. Get the guy who you're training with to the top level of his ability. Train with him. That's going to get you to the top level of your ability. It's undeniable. If your goal is just to be the one that represents the school in that weight class, fine. But if your goal is to be the one that represents the school in that weight class and go win, like, let's bring all the rising tide idea. Let's bring everybody up. That's better for sure for everyone. Okay? So that's an important thing, and I'll just close with this and let you go get some food. The hesitation, the only hesitation I've heard from true high performers in conversations like this is a fear that if I get rid of some of these painful, frustrating things in my own life, that the hunger is going to go with it. The drive is going to go with it. That's a legitimate thing, okay? It will not. It will not. And if you actually want to make it through the finish line, you cannot do that, at least not sustainably over time, if you're driven purely by fear. If you're trying to prove your own self-worth by being a good wrestler or whatever it might be, that will burn through your gas fast. It will not sustain over a season or a career, and it's not the way. Your drive's not going anywhere. The idea is your drive, your talent, your ability, all that stuff that you've already got, the task is to get fear out of the equation, right? So you can just go be the full version of you on the mat whenever you're called to do so. All right, that's your best chance. All right, so today, I really do mean this. Reach out if you've got anything. Coaches, I'm happy to stay in contact in whatever way you think is appropriate. We can drill down on any of these ideas, make it super practical for you in your environment if you want. And you guys, you don't have to follow us on Instagram, but at Good Athlete Project, there's a lot of resources up there. And then I think we can put some QR codes to some of these ideas if you want some future reading while you're here when you head back home. Thanks for your time today, guys.